My wife once nearly crushed my arm during a perfectly normal takeoff. And the funny part is that the pilots hadn't done anything wrong. She absolutely hates flying. Not because gets airsick, she doesn't. Over the years, she has listened to more of my lectures about aviation safety than any reasonable person should have to endure. She knows that commercial aviation is statistically one of the safest forms of transportation ever invented. None of that matters. She simply doesn't like airplanes. Unfortunately for her, she also happens to enjoy traveling, especially if the destination involves warm weather and a beach. This story happened in Ukraine in the early 2000s. After the difficult first years of independence, the economy was finally beginning to grow. Things were going well for me too, and for her birthday, I decided to arrange a surprise. Paris, a luxury hotel overlooking the opera, front row seats at the Lido, and tickets on Air France. So there we were, sitting on an Airbus A319, taxiing toward the runway at Boryspil Airport. The airplane wasn't particularly heavy. The weather was beautiful. The runway was plenty long, which meant a rolling takeoff. The aircraft turned onto the runway and immediately began accelerating. Now, I had long noticed that modern Western takeoff techniques were somewhat different from what we were accustomed to in Soviet aviation. Western airliners typically use the minimum flap setting required for takeoff. It's more efficient, less drag, better fuel economy. As a result, after liftoff, they often pitch up quite aggressively and climb at surprisingly high, nose-up attitudes. Perfectly normal. On the 2154, we also had the option of taking off with 15 degrees of flaps instead of 28 when runway length allowed. In theory. In practice, we rarely did it. Across much of the former Soviet Union, runways were often shorter, rougher, or both. Pilots generally preferred to get airborne as early as possible. Well, except maybe at Frankfurt. Frankfurt had a beautifully long runway and a viewing terrace full of spectators. There we occasionally used 15 degrees too, just to show everyone that a 2154 could put on a rather elegant performance. Anyway, we lifted off. I looked outside and thought, wow, that's quite a pitch angle. The crew was also clearly performing a noise abatement departure, a procedure designed to reduce noise around airports. Not that anyone particularly cared about aircraft noise around Boryspil at the time, but procedures are procedures. Arthur Haley described this maneuver brilliantly in his novel Airport. I grew up reading his books, and honestly, I couldn't improve on his explanation. The basic idea is simple. The aircraft climbs away from the ground as efficiently as possible, at relatively low speed. Then, once it's safely clear of obstacles, the pilots lower the nose to accelerate. The altitude is still increasing. The airplane is still climbing. But to passengers, it feels as if the floor suddenly disappears beneath them. Exactly at that moment, my wife grabbed my forearm with both hands and squeezed. I had no idea such strength could exist inside such a small and elegant woman. Fortunately, our brief fall lasted only a few seconds. I calmly placed my other hand on top of hers. "Everything's fine," I said. "You can relax." She turned toward me with the expression of a hunted animal. "What was that?" "Oh, nothing," I replied. "Just a procedure." She stared at me for another second and then said, in a voice cold enough to refrigerate the entire cabin, "For those who want it, I would perform that procedure under general anesthesia." Honestly, I couldn't argue with her. And the funny thing is, we had pilots like that too. Pilots who enjoyed dramatic maneuvers. I've never really understood it. There are several flying clubs around Kyiv. If you want excitement, aerobatics, steep turns, and sudden drops, they're more than happy to provide it. Passengers, on the other hand, are not there for entertainment. They're there to get from one place to another, preferably without feeling that their soul has briefly separated from their body somewhere over the departure end of the runway.